Anti-BDS legislation has been the cause of great controversy in the United States. So far, 26 states, more than half, have all adopted anti-BDS legislation. What's more, 12 additional states are in the process of passing such legislation. While controversial, this legislation has been hailed by Israel and by many in the U.S. Jewish community as a step in the right direction in countering the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which has spread through Europe and the United States. Here to discuss the legislation and its importance to the U.S. Jewish community is Aharon Kalman, Program Officer at the Ruderman Family Foundation, which works to strengthen ties between Israel and the American Jewish community. Hi, Aharon. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Lidar. Thanks for having me.
So, for those who may not know, let's start by asking, what is anti-BDS legislation?
So, there are different types of anti-BDS legislation, and because we're talking about legislation at the state level, every state does it slightly differently. But what is, if you would, common for everyone is the idea that you say you cannot, as a state, support financially organizations, companies which actively engage in BDS, which is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. In other words, anti-BDS legislation is a statement that says we, as states in the United States, we as officials, elected officials, and policymakers in the United States are not willing to take part in this discriminatory movement against Israel, which I must add is also sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes anti-Semitic.
And at the end of the day, BDS targets Israel. So why is the U.S. Jewish community standing behind this legislation? I mean, do they view BDS as a strategic threat to the U.S. Jewish community as well?
So the report, which we released last month, shows that, and I have to say, as of last month, there were 26 states. Mississippi recently passed in its House of Representatives legislation. It has to pass the Senate and be signed into law, but it looks like we're en route to state number 27. And what this shows is that the efforts in the anti-BDS legislation are a direct continuation of efforts by the American Jewish community to stop boycotts against Israel as early as the 1940s and 1950s and 1960s and 70s, when the community was fighting to help Israel against the Arab boycott. And the main reason that the American Jewish community, many organizations within the American Jewish community are involved in this is because they view BDS as what it is, which is discriminating against someone for doing business with Israel, meaning discriminating against someone based on religion, based on ethnicity. And I think that I'm not an American Jew, but for many within the American Jewish community, when they fight the BDS movement, they see themselves as stepping up and standing with Israel, supporting Israel, but also allowing themselves to maintain the relationship they want with the Jewish state.
So really showing their support for Israel. On the other hand, I have to ask, it's no secret that there are many American Jewish supporters of BDS who play an active role in promoting BDS. So how does this play out regarding the controversy over the anti-BDS legislation?
So I think that saying there are many American Jews might be giving them too much credit. There are American Jews who support BDS. So they tend to be loud and noisy and get some attention. But we have to note that also amongst the American Jewish organizations or the prominent American Jewish leaders who oppose this legislation that we're talking about at the state and at the federal level, most of them are anti-BDS, meaning they say we oppose BDS. We have a tactical argument as to whether this is the best way forward. But to say that there are many American Jews who actively support BDS, I think, is to somewhat distort reality. We have to acknowledge there are some who do, but the vast majority of the American Jewish community are against BDS, stand proudly with Israel, and that's what we at the Ruderman Family Foundation are showing the Israelis through the report, through the video we released with it, and through our ongoing activity.
And this is, of course, sort of a bipartisan support, right? We're seeing it both from the right and the left in terms of the U.S. Jewish community.
100%. And if you look at the recent vote in the Senate, which is at the federal level, not the state level, but it passed with an overwhelming majority, which included the most Democrats alongside the Republicans. Again, there are some who oppose the legislation, but also amongst them, many of them view it as a tactical question. What is the best way to fight BDS? And their vote against is not an endorsement of the actual movement.
Now, it's also no secret that there are strains between Israel and the American Jewish community, something that's been building, for a number of years. Now, the Ruderman Family Foundation has played a very active role in trying to strengthen this relationship, this bond between the U.S. Jewish community and Israel. Can you talk a little bit about the work that the foundation does in this regard?
Of course. So, like you said, Lidar, there are tensions. There's part of a relationship, and a relationship has ups and downs. And over a decade ago, the Ruderman Family Foundation understood that it's important to educate Jews in the United States, Jews in the diaspora about Israel. But if we want to maintain a strong, vibrant relationship between the sides, we also need to educate Israelis and Israeli policymakers and decision makers about the American Jewish community. And our work as a foundation is geared towards that. We take what's been nicknamed reverse birthrights on trips to the United States to expose Israeli journalists, members of Knesset from both sides, coalition, opposition, left and right, to what the American Jewish community is. We run academic programs with Haifa University and others. We conduct research papers. We do public campaigns in the media. And we try to reach those people who impact Israeli policy so that when they make policy decisions, they take into consideration the feelings of the American Jewish community, their perspective. Again, it might not always be the result, the outcome that the American side wants, but we want that dialogue to happen. We think it's important that the sides talk to each other as opposed to fight with each other.
So sort of bridging the gap, sort of reverse, right? Educating the Israelis about the American Jewish community.
Exactly. When I was working years ago with a youth from the United States, there was a joke where we said when an American Jew meets an Israeli in Tel Aviv, they speak about Tel Aviv. And when they meet the same Israeli and the same American Jew in New York, they still speak about Tel Aviv. And what we want them to do is to be able to talk about New York, to talk about Florida, about Boston, Chicago, Dallas, and every other Jewish community in the United States, because for a relationship to be a two-way relationship, both sides need to know each other and not just one side know about the other.
Well, great. Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.